An orientation programme out of curriculum alignment. Since attending the Creating Frameworks module, I realised that the education programme I facilitate might not be in curriculum alignment. Therefore, I will use Biggs's model of constructive alignment to critique the orientation programme for new staff. This is a 6-day programme and is joint between Neurosciences Intensive Care Unit and Neuroscience Inpatients Ward. The aim is that the nurses access the programme within 6 months of commencing their new role. So what is constructive alignment? Constructive alignment is based on 2 principles: constructivism in learning and aligning both the teaching and the assessment tasks to the intended learning outcome. Biggs and Tang state that constructive comes from the constructivist theory that learners use their own activity to construct their knowledge as interpreted through their own existing schemata. They then go on to explain that alignment in curriculum theory is that the assessment task should be aligned to what is intended to be learned. When designing an aligned curriculum, firstly you must describe the intended learning outcome, then create an environment by using teaching learning activities to lead to the intended learning outcome. The next step is to use assessment tasks to assess the student's learning in relation to the intended learning outcome, and finally transforming the judgment into standard grading criteria. Constructive alignment requires the design of your teaching programme to use a verb within the intended learning outcome which indicates the standard of performance you are expecting, that the content to be learned by using the teaching learning activities address the verb, and that also the assessment tasks also contain the verb. This will then enable the teacher to judge the student's performance to meet the set criteria. A learning outcome is a statement of what the learner is expected to know, understand and be able to do at the end of a period of learning. The intended learning outcomes, as we know, need to be described in the form of a verb, its object and to the standard as what the student will attain. By using Bloom's revised taxonomy, this can guide us as to the correct verbs in relation to the level of knowledge we require the students to have. The learning outcomes need to be clear as to what kind of knowledge you want the students to ascertain, whether it be declarative or functioning. Declarative knowledge is knowing the theories and specific topics, whereas functioning knowledge is knowledge that informs the action we take. For the orientation programme, the overall learning outcomes are not stated. Therefore, this does make it difficult for the nurse to exactly know what is expected of them and what should be learnt by the end of the programme. Biggs and Tang go on to discuss how there should be no more than 5 intended learning outcomes. Even if there are more topics that need covering in the programme, they recommend writing integrated learning outcomes which will then address several topics. For the orientation, by stating the overall intended learning outcomes, this will enhance the student's experience for them by knowing what they will learn and what knowledge they require during the orientation programme. For the mentors, it will provide guidance on what has been covered in the programme and to what level. When looking at the individual teaching sessions on the programme, there are also some sessions with no outcomes and some with only one overarching outcome. For some of the sessions they are more statements rather than a learning outcome, and they do not all have the presence of a verb. Teaching learning activities. The teaching methods chosen need to engage the student in activities that require them to perform in a way set out in the curriculum intended learning outcomes. The teaching learning activities chosen to ensure that learning outcomes are met will again be dependent on whether it's declarative or functioning knowledge that is being built on. Activities for constructing declarative knowledge base might well be a lecture, but within this many activities can be undertaken, such as the use of concept maps, minute papers, note taking. When looking at teaching learning activities for functioning knowledge, we know the student has the knowledge base and they need to apply it. Activities such as case-based learning, group work, using buzz groups, jigsaw groups, problem solving and learning cells all help the student to apply the knowledge. The orientation programme is taught by various staff ranging from specialist nurses, staff nurses, physiotherapists, dietitians, doctors. It's therefore very difficult to know exactly whether the learning outcomes that are documented have been achieved and what learning activities have been used in each session and whether the learning has been successful. If the teaching is aligned, then the assessment should reinforce the learning. The curriculum needs to be reflected in the assessment, and that then means the learning activities of the teachers and the students are both directed at the same goal. In preparing for assessment, the student will also be learning the curriculum. The type of assessment chosen again will depend on the knowledge you are assessing. For assessing functioning knowledge, individual and group projects or presentations or student posters can be chosen. Declarative knowledge, the student is required to write about a topic or body of knowledge, and examples of this type of assessment are written exam papers, MCQs and essays. This type of assessment could though lead to surface learning for the student. Within the orientation programme there are 3 different assessment methods. Unfortunately, as there are no learning outcomes for the orientation programme, the assessments are not aligned either. All staff attend RAID. There is a practical assessment in the afternoon. This consists of a scenario to which they have to work through and take the appropriate action. Once the scenario is finished, they are informed of their results and have feedback accordingly. This is a summative piece of work and tests the students' declarative knowledge. If they fail, they are expected to retake the assignment again. The second assessment for the student is a presentation on a topic of their choice in relation to their area they work in. This is not a summative piece of work, but is an opportunity to share knowledge about the topic in a safe environment. This though builds on the student's declarative knowledge and increases the functioning knowledge. There is also an assessment paper related to their area of work. This is more formative than summative. The aim is to identify areas of knowledge that the students need to develop, which in turn will help them in the clinical environment. Lastly, we look at the standard grading criteria. Clear assessment criteria needs to be established for each assessment task, and this should be aligned with the intended learning outcomes. Within the orientation programme, this fails immediately as there are no learning outcomes. Although there is a set of assessment criteria for the RAID programme, there is no grading criteria for the written assessments or the presentations. So, to conclude, the joint orientation programme is not in constructive alignment. Therefore, my recommendations are to write intended learning outcomes for the orientation programme, to also develop learning outcomes for each of the individual sessions. This will then help the teacher know what level of knowledge the students require, and also the students will then know what is expected from them. I also plan to design an assessment task to test the learning outcomes, hopefully to develop a summative assessment to develop the students' functioning knowledge by the use of a case study, and then lastly to develop criteria for marking based on the learning outcomes. This then, with all these improvements, will then make this course become a course in constructive alignment. Thank you.